On today's Locked On Texan podcast, James Carson of Texans Unfiltered Podcast joins the show to discuss the biggest concerns heading into training camp and which rookie might shock you.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Locked On Texan listeners and viewers, to a Thursday episode of the Locked On Texan podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to everyone who listens to the podcast Monday through Friday, right now in the off season, every other day. If you are new to the Locked On Texan podcast, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texan podcast wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as YouTube, whenever you get an opportunity to do so, which should be right now. I am your Texans football analyst, John, some sports guy Hickman. And of course, I'm joined by none other than Texan beat reporter and Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis. For today's show, we're going to look at what does success look like for second-year sophomore linebacker Christian Harris. But first, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, James Carson, Texan Unfiltered Podcast. Back to the Locked On Texas podcast. It's been a while. Super glad to have you back on today's podcast. I want to jump right into it. When looking at training camp, which kicks off in a couple of weeks, you got the good, you got the bad, and in some cases, you may have the ugly. What are your biggest camp concerns ahead of training camp?
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest concern should be the defensive line. We just don't really know exactly what that defensive line is going to look like and what they're going to be capable of. A ton of bodies. You have the secondary to complement that pass rush and that defensive line, but I think ultimately we really need to see, one, can Greenard stay healthy? What type of rookie year is Will Anderson going to have? There's a ton of question marks on the defensive line, but the potential is there to be above average. We just haven't. We didn't see it last year. We obviously added some pieces this year, so there's some room for improvement, and there's some opportunity that we should see some improvement. But I would say that would probably be the biggest concern, would be the defensive line for me.
You talked about, wanting to see improvements, and I 100% agree with you. One of the, I guess you can call it, biggest factors into whether or not we're going to see improved play from that D-line is, I guess at this point, the health of John Greenard. So, James, can you just talk about what have you seen from John Greenard over the last 3 years? And if you can put some type of emphasis on it, what will success look like for Greenard going into his fourth season?
Yeah, it's honestly, it's going to be health. Right. He just can't stay healthy. Honestly, everything on film, everything he's done, it's all there he should be able to put it together and have a healthy season. He's got a quick first step, maybe the quickest first step on the Texans D line. He can be very physical off the line and off the ball. So, I think it's really just all related to health for Greenard. He's put it together. We've seen significant flashes and multiple times. It's going to be interesting to see how D'Amico uses them. I think that's probably going to be, honestly, the one thing that does give us some hope, in my opinion, when it comes to the defensive line is just the fact that we have a proper coach that could actually put players in a position to have success. And the last 2 years, we haven't seen that. So that change alone should be a pretty significant improvement. Now add the talent of Will Anderson, a potentially healthy Jonathan Greenard. There's, really who knows what that D-line is capable of.
I want to stay with the D-line before we move forward. Are you more concerned about the edge position when you look at the D-line, or is it in its entirety? Because I think adding Sheldon Rankins, Hassan Ridgeway is a good backup guy. I'm curious to see Roy Lopez in year 3. The addition of Thomas Booker from last year. He's a guy that I'm curious to see how he works out in year 2, getting an opportunity to go straight from last year, a lot of college, now all NFL and football. So is it more so interior or exterior when you judge the defensive line?
I would say it's honestly a combination of the two. I think if I had to pick one, it would probably be the edge, but just because there's question marks, right? We all believe Will Anderson is the guy and is that star focal point defensive lineman, but an edge rusher, but we really don't know yet, right? It's all a crapshoot when it comes to the draft. He has the talent. He did it in college. There should be no reason to question what he's capable of doing in the NFL, but we're just yet to see it, so we have to be somewhat hesitant. Sheldon Rankins is a great addition. You really can't overstate it. That's something that the team needed. We haven't had an interior pass rusher in, I don't know. Honestly, I can't think of the last time. I mean, DJ Reader wasn't really a pass rusher, but he could at times. But really, we haven't had one in quite some time. So Rankins is going to be a nice piece that is going to be fun to watch. But I think it's more the edge, right? If Greenard's hurt, then what? Thomas Booker, he showed some things last year, but really not enough to be able to say, hey, I feel really good about this. I would say actually Roy Lopez, Wall of Fame favorite. I expect him to be a cut this year. And it's not because he isn't talented. I think a lot of why Roy got the shine that he got was because the team was so talent deficient that he looked the part in his rookie year. Didn't see a ton of it last year. Saw some, but not much. I wouldn't be surprised if Roy Lopez is cut. So to answer your questions and sum it up, come back full circle, I would say it's a combination of the two, but I would probably say I give the edge to the edge of being my biggest concern.
Flipping over to the offensive side of the ball, James, I think we all can agree the biggest concern there is the wide receiver group. How do you feel about that group going into training camp?
Yeah, wide receivers, there's bodies. There are some bodies. Let's see.
But is there talent?
Positive. That's positive compared to last year. The bodies in that room last year were, how you describe it. It was a talent deficiency.
Yeah, and to be honest, like I like the bodies. I like the bodies a lot more this year than I do the year 2 years prior. I'm very, very I'm in love with Nico Collins on film. If you just watch the first 6 games of last season, he looks like a completely different wide receiver than he did his rookie year. He's very dominant, quick off the line, has no problem being physical. He actually worked on his route running a lot last offseason. I think Nico Collins, and again, it's unfortunate that we have to keep coming back to this, but if he can stay healthy, I think he really has the opportunity to be a true number 1 wide receiver. Maybe not up there with the Justin Jeffersons and, all of those guys, but maybe a tier below, but a very solid, like above Brandon Cooks, but below Justin Jefferson. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him take that leap. I really wouldn't. If you look at him, like I said, for the first 6 weeks last season with Davis, he didn't have stats that blew your mind, but he did have some catches, some routes. He was obviously the main target for Davis. Once Nico went down, Davis kind of looked like a completely different quarterback. And so I would say I feel okay about the wide receivers. Would we like to have a truly defined number 1 wide receiver? Of course, but the cards just didn't fall that way. But there is talent. I like the additions that they had. And I'm not too concerned. It's just more or less right now we need to figure out what that wide receiver room is going to look like after camp and what we're going to see from those wide receivers in camp. I'd say the biggest question I have for the offensive line is the offensive line. We just haven't seen consistent play there, right? Kenny Green, let's just be honest, terrible year, terrible rookie year, looked lost out there. Didn't look like he's ever played guard before. Now, we have you just have to question coaching when it comes to all of these pieces, but will the coaching staff be able to get the most out of this offensive line? Will we be able to find a center? That's still a question mark. And it's hard to develop as a guard when you don't have a consistent center. Kenny Green didn't have one. So I would say the offensive line outside of Titus and Laramie are probably the biggest questions. There are pieces. We just need to see it all come together and it be a cohesive piece when it comes to the interior of the offensive line.
I can't wait to talk about which rookie is going to put pressure on a vet in front of them. But before we do that and move along, which position seems to be the most well-rounded going into camp that could thrive the most this season?
Oh, so it's the secondary group, without a doubt. Anybody that says anything different is just not paying attention.
Pick one on the defense, pick one on the offense. I want to hear this.
Like a player or just the
2 groups and why?
Oh, the 2. Yeah, so I would say the secondary is – so let's just go cornerback instead of cornerback and safety. I do think safety is going to be wow. But when you look at the cornerback room, Derek Stingley really didn't get a fair shake last year. playing in the scheme that he played in. It wasn't fit to his skill set. He's a very risky corner. He's a physical corner. And he just didn't fit that scheme. So it's going to be very interesting to see what he does in D'Amico's defense. And then you look at just the depth that you have in the quarterback room. I mean, it's full of depth and full of guys that can play. Whether Steven Nelson's acting like a fool or not, like he had a very good season. He had his best season that he has had in his career with the Texans last year. You got Desmond King. There's really no questions about the quarterback room. I would say for the offensive side of the ball, I think maybe tight end, but maybe not because it's really just one guy, right? We're all betting on Dalton Schultz, but I really like Brevin Jordan, and I think that maybe scheme wise he hasn't had the best opportunity to really thrive either. But it's really hard to go against the running backs, right? With Dameon Pierce, Devin Singletary, those are two guys. This is probably the best running back tandem we've had since.
Foster and Tate.
Foster and Tate, right?
Yeah. Duke Johnson, maybe?
No, I think Foster and Tate would be.
This is better than Foster and Tate. I mean, better than
Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson.
Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson. Not better than Foster and Tate. We'll see, maybe. But I think it's really hard to not feel really good about that running back room, and especially with the third running back being a young guy. It'll be interesting to see how they use Dameon Pierce. Obviously, he's a very physical runner. He can't be the guy that totes the rock, 350, 400 times in a season. He showed that as a rookie year. We're going to need to spell him some way. Singletary, not the greatest runner, but great out of the backfield. Great with the ball in his hands in the passing game, but can break some runs as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that running back room looks. But I would say those are probably that's probably the group I'm most excited about because there seems to be some consistency along with two players that have shown they can do what we need them to do.
Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you with players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. When on the clock for the first overall pick in the 2023 fantasy draft, it's okay to get downright gritty about doing the gritty. That means picking Vikings wide receiver Jettas Justin Jefferson is a guaranteed fit. Over the past 2 seasons, Jefferson led the league in both receptions and receiving yards. He will remain a dominant number 1 receiver and a target monster this season. Jefferson is a guaranteed fit to ignite the rest of your fantasy football lineup towards winning success. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure that you and your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternators, shocks, struts, you name it, eBay Motors has it. And they'll make sure it's the right fit for you and your car because eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit helps you understand what part you need for your vehicle the first time. For parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners. My man James stopping by the show. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at YoungAri_Gold. Got to continue with the Texan talk, right? Looking at this team is a good combination of vets and young guys. You look at the wide receiver group, Nico Collins going into year 3, but you got the ultimate vet in Robert Woods. But then you look at Xavier Hutchinson. Then you look at Tank Dell. Then you look at John Mechie, who will be essentially, in my opinion, a rookie. Comparing that to Woods, Collins, Noah Brown, in a sense. Jalen Camp is still on this roster as well, so he's like in between guy. On the defensive side of the ball, you got Henry To'o. You got Christian Harris going into year 2, but you also got Denzel Perryman, who they signed in the offseason, Corey Littleton, who they signed in the offseason. Christian Kirksey is still on this team as well. When you look at the landscape of this roster, break it down group by group, position by position, player by player, which rookie do you think to yourself, you know what? Depending on the opportunities he gets, he may be able to beat out this veteran.
Oh, okay. So we're going to a totally different. When you said pressuring, I really started to think of that in a different light. So I would say, who could beat out the veteran? I think Christian Harris definitely has an opportunity to do it and potentially be that main linebacker, that 3-down linebacker for this team. Mechie, he could be the number 2, right? He has the skill set. I think it's just unfair to expect it. Hasn't played football in forever. It's going to take him a long time to get acclimated again, get used to NFL speed, NFL competition. But the skill set is there, and he has every reason to. I think Tank Dell's another interesting wide receiver to watch that could potentially get to that 2 spot as well. I know there seems like a lot of people are doubting Tank Dell. I totally understand it. I don't understand how you can watch Kyle Shanahan's offense and how they use Deebo Samuel and then look at Tank Dell outside of size and say this guy is not going to have, every opportunity to make something happen. So I would say those are probably the guys I would watch. I think as far as any other position, I don't know. I don't really know if there's other positions that's really going to get beaten out by a rookie. Other than CJ Stroud, right? Like CJ Stroud is he's going to win the quarterback competition. He's going to be given the opportunity to take that first snap in week 1. I do think that the interesting aspect with CJ Stroud and Davis Mills is Davis is also striving and doing what he can. Every day he's going to be competing. He's got to put good film out there, whether it be for the Texans or for another team. And it'll be interesting to see what pressure he applies to CJ Stroud. I'm not expecting a ton. I'm not saying that Davis Mills is going to have a starting opportunity or anything like that. But, he does have 2 years in the league. He does know the league better. He does know defenses better. And it'll be interesting to see how CJ takes the pressure of having Davis behind him, because Davis does need to find another route for his career. It's not going to be here. So what can he do to ensure that he has an opportunity somewhere else? So I think there's some really interesting storylines going into camp, to be honest with you.
I do want to circle back to the first segment. We talked about Jonathan Greenard. You talked about Jonathan Greenard. Is there an opportunity there for Dylan Horton, a rookie, to, if he goes out and performs, and let's just say Greenard is still dealing with some of the same nagging injuries throughout the training camp, or if Horton is just flat out competing and playing better ball, like is that somewhere where you may say maybe he's not taking away all of your snaps, but the amount of snaps you could potentially be playing will be going. Some of those snaps could be going to Dylan Horton.
Yeah, I would say based on what we know of D'Amico, the best player's playing. So there's not going to be any. There's no, like, you're not handed a value based on where you're drafted and saying it's not BOB anymore. It's going to be the best player. So could Horton do it? I think maybe. I wasn't the biggest fan of that pick. I think he's a talented guy, but I don't think it's a year 1 talented guy. I think it's going to take him some time to really get ramped up. I also think Jonathan Greenard is that much better, to where outside of injury, I can't see Horton taking snaps from Greenard. So,
James, I want to go back to what you just finished talking about in terms of Davis Mills. You talked about him being, going into his 3rd season. You're talking about how he has been able to learn and play against NFL defenses, and we haven't seen that yet from CJ Stroud. But I do want to ask you this question. Do you think, because of that, there could be a benefit factor of CJ Stroud starting the season, let's say the first 3-4 weeks on the bench learning from afar? And I ask you that only because you remember the last 2 years, every time Davis Mills was pulled and he was put back in, he always came back and talked about how those weeks of learning the game and studying from afar actually helped him improve. And every time he came back, reinserted in as the starter, we saw better play from Davis Mills both in 2021 and in 2022.
Yeah, I think it's Cody. That's honestly like a very interesting thought, because you're right. There's so much for knowledge for CJ to gain by being able to sit back. And while the fans, they're going to want to see the flashy number 2 pick overall start week 1, ultimately you have to ask yourself as a fan, what is best for this franchise moving forward long term? And how do you get CJ to a place to where he's comfortable and able to step in and be the quarterback that you want him to be? And if we just look at around the league over the last 6 to 7 years, I mean, the guys that go in to start, it takes a while to get acclimated. It takes some time to really get going. You have the Trevor Lawrences of the world who would occasionally light a game on fire or something like that. But outside of that, there really isn't a lot of situations where the guy comes in and has success early on. So I do think that it would be probably extremely beneficial for that to be the case. But I do believe also that if that's to happen, that means Davis beat CJ out in training camp, because I can't see CJ. I can't see CJ winning and DeMeco still saying, "Here, Davis, here's the keys for it until you mess up," or whatever it may be, until CJ's ready. I think DeMeco's here to win games. And I think that's something that we all have to remember, is that the tanking aspect is over. Like, losing games, that's not an option anymore. We have to win games. So DeMeco's going to play the best guy that's going to put them in the best position to win. Could that be Davis Mills through week 4, week 5, 6? Possibly. It all depends on how everything goes in training camp. But I wouldn't be shocked. And honestly, Cody, I think that would probably be the best route for this team to go. We don't know enough about CJ. Everything we know about CJ from a mental perspective is what we saw leading up to the draft, right? There was the S2 talk, all of that doesn't process very well. Then all the other reports came out about, he's not very mature, things of that nature. All reports that I don't know if we put a ton of weight into. But the S2 test, maybe, right? It's Ohio State quarterback in a simplified college offense. We haven't seen an Ohio State quarterback have success in the league. So, there's reasons to think that we should probably give him the time to get acclimated. And that's what's going to be best for his development. So I think you're right, Cody. I think it's a really good way to look at it.
Before we close out with you, James, and again, thank you for stopping by. Biggest shocker for this year. Go.
Texans win the AFC South.
Oh, Lord. I know y'all got music battle, but y'all definitely agree on that.
Yeah. Honestly, though, I just don't buy any of the teams.
Not even Jacksonville? Because as of right now, they do have the better quarterback.
They have the better quarterback, but I don't think they have the better coach. I think Peterson's voice tends to get, there's a reason why he left Philly, right? Like, everybody stops talking about that. They just go, "Oh, Peterson with Lawrence, Peterson with Lawrence." But the guy won a Super Bowl and exited the building. Like, that's just not something you see very often. So why did that happen?
That's a good point.
So, I wouldn't be shocked to see Jacksonville be somewhat average or mediocre. But I think with DeMeco, I think this team was talent deficient year 1 with David Coley. I think year two of the rebuild, or year 2 post Deshaun, however you want to view it, Lovey was not a great coach. He really didn't put his players in a position to succeed. And I think that injection alone of just having a guy who understands where the players need to be and how to put them in a position to succeed is going to pay dividends. It's going to be a big, big part of what this team accomplishes this year. And, add to the fact that there's a ton of talent added to this team too. And, when you add talent and you add good coaching, everything seems to kind of work really well. Nobody thought the Giants were going to go to the Super Bowl that year. And the Giants went and won the Super Bowl that year. Like, they were a wild card team and they just went on. It's just the NFL. You can't predict any of it. But I can predict that. History shows in the NFL, bad franchises are bad franchises. They very, very rarely get it right and correct. And Jacksonville's always been terrible. And I can't see it being any different. Even after the AFC Championship, what happened? Jacksonville ran away. There was there was nothing. Turned into a litter box.
I think that's why. I disagree with the Doug Peterson not being a good coach. I think Doug Peterson is a good coach.
I think he's a good coach for 2 or 3 years.
for a short span.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that when we look at this division this year, Indy and Houston is in the same boat.
Indy's somewhat scary, though. Let's just be very clear.
Indy is scary simply because they already had the major pieces there. And if that team is healthy, you look at a healthy Quentin Nelson, you look at a healthy defense. So that's the difference. But then I question Indy's coach. I don't believe in Tennessee simply because this is a quarterback league, and you have 3 quarterbacks on that roster with 2 of them having multiple question marks leading your franchise. I mean, we're hearing reports right now that Malik Willis is outplaying Will Levis. And so if that's the case, and I already have lost faith on Ryan Tannehill, well, who do you fall back on?
Yeah.
When I look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, ladies and gentlemen, I've said this before and I'll say it again. A lot of missed interceptions and takeaways happened last year in the favor of Jacksonville, right? That's number one. And to your point, they had a hot year with Jacksonville. The very next year, I think they were picking in the top 5 of the NFL draft. And so I have to see the consistency there. Now, you can also say, well, there hasn't been any consistency with the Houston Texans. That's true, but I also mean that's how much I just don't believe in Jacksonville unless I see it 2 years in a row. And we haven't seen it from Jacksonville 2 years in a row in a very long time, if ever. So I've been on record, my man, by saying I think Houston has an opportunity, especially when this team can get it right late in the season to maybe pull out this division.
The dark horse, the ultimate dark horse is Indy. Look, Anthony Richardson, if he is
Shane Steichen,
take that away. It's not even that. Just Anthony Richardson is LeBron James at quarterback. That is just from a build perspective. Okay, like let's just put the glasses back on.
I can see where you're coming from now.
He's not coming in with all the hype and everything that LeBron had. But from a build perspective, it's just he's a god. Like he's Thor playing quarterback. It's insane to think about. But then he's a freak athlete. He's fast. He's got a cannon, and he only has 1 year starting in Florida. If he can put it together, and Steichen can run the offense that fits his style, Indy could be scary if Anthony Richardson gets it together week 8, week 9, and starts to form some consistency at the QB position. Indy could be. So honestly, if I had to pick, it'd be either Indy or Houston that I think win the division. I don't think Jacksonville is going to be in the running at all, and I think Tennessee is going to tank for Caleb.
Yeah, and I think for Indy, if they're healthy, they may come out the gate the better.
They might,
because they already have a lot of those pieces. I don't want to count Jacksonville all the way out. They did win the division last year, but I have to see it again to believe in that franchise moving forward. James, man, where can everybody find you on social media and any other work that you may be doing?
You can follow me on Twitter at YoungAri_gold. You can find the podcast anywhere. If you can find a new episode, it's not me. But there will be some soon, I'm sure. And you can go to TexansUnfiltered.com. You can follow me on Instagram at I am YoungAriGold. Probably should make that consistent from brand perspective. But yeah, you guys can find me anywhere. Just Google me. I'm there. And I appreciate you two having me on. Cody, it's awesome to be able to actually finally, after 5 years of Twitter streets, be able to actually put a face to the name and actually have a conversation with you. I love your work. I think you're one of the better ones to do it. And, you definitely – I love how you hold your own and just kind of stay in your lane. You never get involved in any of the other stuff. And I think you're an amazing reporter, bro, and just keep it up.
I appreciate it, man. It really means a lot, truly, especially somebody coming from you, because when we first started this podcast, we was looking up to you guys. Like, we want to be on their level one day.
Well, I appreciate it.
Welcome back in, Locked On Texan listeners and viewers. Before we close out today's show, I had a good conversation with my man, James Carson. You guys know him from the Unfiltered Texan podcast on Twitter at YoungAri_gold. And I do want to bring back the camp concerns and rookies, really more so the rookies that can pressure vets in taking their spots. But looking at sophomore linebacker Christian Harris, we talked a little bit about him on yesterday's podcast. What does success look like him going into his sophomore year?
For me, it's easy taking him as this team's number one linebacker. And I only say that because every single position, well, almost every single position outside wide receiver, you have that guy who's going to be your number one cornerback, which is Derek Stingley, your number one safety, who they basically have two, but I think we can all agree that is going to be Jalen Petrie. Of course, the running back position, Damian Pierce. You look at the offensive line, is Laramie Tunsil. Like, I want to see Christian Harris step up and be this team's number one linebacker, because we could talk about Perriman, we could talk about Littleton, we could debate and argue whether or not Christian Kersey is going to be on this team. However, this is a guy that has the most potential, possibly the most talent, and is the most important linebacker in that group heading into training camp and heading into the 2023 campaign.
Thank you guys for listening and watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans. Subscribe, like, and comment to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube as well. Follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.